Hi, I'm Oliver Gao. I'm the director of Cornell System Engineering Program and also a professor with the School of Civil and Environmental Engineering. So I'll be conducting these system conversations with our Ezra System Seminar speakers. We bring a lot of great speakers here, and we want to take the opportunity to talk with them about a lot of system challenges and their views and their solutions. Today, we are very delighted to have one of our Cornellians, of course, in our Cornell local people, Professor Rick Geddes. He's a professor in the Department of Policy Analysis and Management at Cornell University, and he's also a core faculty with the Cornell Institute of Public Affairs. So Rick is a founding director of the Cornell Program in Infrastructure Policy, which we call CIPA, on which I also serve as assistant to Rick as associate director for CIPA. So he's also a visiting scholar at the American Enterprise Institute and a research fellow with the Mineta Transportation Institute and San Jose State University. So Rick got his MA and PhD degrees in economics from University of Chicago. So Rick and we work very closely, and I know Rick is really a systems person. So, Rick, it's great to have you today.
Thanks, Oliver. It's great to be here.
Yes. So, even though we talk a lot together about different things, but I believe our audience and a lot of people would like to know more about yourself, your career, so whatever you would like to tell us.
Sure. So rather than go through my whole career, maybe I'll just talk about the part that's relevant for infrastructure policy. And one question is, how did I get into this area? Since I'm an economist, as you noted, my graduate degrees are in economics and not in civil engineering. So I'm a social scientist. And but a lot of the problems that we deal with in infrastructure, we often think of as civil engineering kind of problems. So one of the goals of my career at this point is to try to bring more public policy and economics understandings and approaches to the delivery of physical infrastructure. So I think it might be useful for us to define sort of what we mean by infrastructure, because that word is heavily used. Some people talk about the internet and things like that, but we're talking mainly today about physical infrastructure. And I like to divide that into two broad categories. One is civil infrastructure, and the other is what we call social infrastructure. And civil infrastructure is often part of a network. It's often things like roads, bridges, airports, seaports, drinking water systems, wastewater treatment systems, storm drain systems, and it can be energy systems as well. So everything it takes to get electricity to our homes and businesses. So generating capacity, transmission lines, distribution systems, etc., we can think of. But also there's a lot of pieces, I think, of civil infrastructure that people don't often think about, like sidewalks are part of it. Street lights, right, are an important part of it. Now the other bucket, of course, is social infrastructure. And that's increasingly being delivered, being thought of as an important part of our the infrastructure of any developed country. But it's typically a standalone facility. So it could be a school, a prison, a courthouse, a hospital, and these important facilities for providing health care, criminal justice, etc., are delivered in similar ways that we might deliver a bridge or a tunnel or a road. So that's the subject matter that I'm dealing with, and I got introduced through transportation infrastructure. So mainly through the roads, bridges, and tunnel part by working at the White House at the Council of Economic Advisors. This is back in the 04-05 academic year, and I was helping to work on the Safety Lou Highway Bill of 2005 that was going through Congress at that time. And I was exposed to all these policy issues in infrastructure. And that's the tolling of roads, or how do we raise more funding? So the underlying issue is funding. And that is, where do the underlying dollars come from to pay for the infrastructure? And increasingly in the United States and many countries, that's a core problem. It's just state and local governments don't have the money, the underlying dollars, to pay for the infrastructure. So do you toll roads? Do you raise the gas taxes? Do you raise diesel taxes? Do you have some dedicated sales tax? What is the approach? So that I was exposed to that, and also public-private partnerships, which you and I have talked about a lot, which is this notion of bundling together or combining different elements of project delivery, like design and construction might be combined with operation and maintenance of the facility over, say, a 25 or 30-year period. And you could combine that with financing, with a financing package. So I was exposed to public-private partnerships and all these fascinating issues: environmental permitting, engaging stakeholders, local communities. When you build a big infrastructure project is very important. And as a result of that, I was appointed by President George W. Bush to a congressionally created commission. It was created in that same Safety Lou Highway bill, and it was called the National Surface Transportation Revenue Policy and Revenue Study Commission. And Congress created this to study these funding sources, but also public-private partnerships, et cetera. And I was exposed to more of these issues, and I developed an appreciation for the importance of public policy in helping to improve infrastructure delivery. And so, as a result of that, after we reported to Congress in 2008, I realized there was a lot of faculty members like yourself here at Cornell who might be trained in technical areas like civil engineering or materials science or earth and atmospheric sciences or other things like law, but shared this concern and passion for infrastructure policy issues and improving infrastructure delivery, whether it's in developing countries or Europe, the United States, wherever. But there was no academic center, sort of locus of effort here at Cornell that focused on the policy side of infrastructure. So that was the motivation for forming CIPA, which you mentioned, back in September of 2012. And so I think since that time, it's been 6 years, we've had tremendous success in generating additional faculty interest, attracting younger faculty, PhD students, postdoctoral students, sabbatical visitors, undergraduate students, all of whom share this interest and passion for improving the delivery of physical infrastructure. And so, we've, as a result of that, gotten a lot of research projects out, and it's been totally exciting for me to deal with different fields, that could be very different from social science, and see, learn about the type of work that's being done in other departments and colleges at Cornell. But we still sort of focus on the main questions surrounding infrastructure, which are the main problems, right? So traffic congestion and transportation is a huge problem, and I know your research on fine particulates from diesel fumes, quantifies the harm associated with that. Deferred maintenance is a big problem. The United States has a huge backlog of just maintenance projects at the state and local level that could be, that really need to be done. But again, we don't have the funding. Slow environmental permitting is another policy problem. The permitting process is important, but it's become very cumbersome, takes a long time, is too slow. Sometimes project selection has been a problem, and by that I mean, that's the bridge to nowhere problem, where certain projects are seen as earmarks that are done only for political purposes, but not really in the best economic interest of the community where they're being done. So, those are just a few of the problems associated with it. I think another one, to add a fifth, is just slow technological adoption. Mm-hmm. So I've seen time and time again when I talk to academics, particularly in colleges of engineering around the country, but also other places where innovation is occurring, that there are these amazing new technologies, new materials, smart streetlights, driverless cars, on, that could be applied in infrastructure, not just in transportation, but in drinking water treatment, wastewater treatment, energy systems. But the way infrastructure has historically been delivered in the United States makes the system slow to adopt a lot of these technologies, even though they're pretty much proven. So I would say in terms of problems, those are 5 problems with infrastructure delivery in the United States where I think an academic program, like CPIP could help a lot. So that's my background on this.
Based on all those problems that you have described that exist in our infrastructure system, now it's not hard for us to understand, no wonder why our infrastructure is now graded as level D.
Right.
All those problems. I really appreciate that you pointed out those those challenges, and particularly I appreciate when you talk about infrastructure, you're actually talking about both the physical civil infrastructure in parallel with the social infrastructure, because these 2 parts actually they go hand in hand. They actually affect each other, right? So with all those problems, of course, as researchers, especially as a concerned economist of where our society is, so do you feel with all those challenges, do we have any kind of silver bullet or where could be a handle to the problem that we can grab that handle and start solving those problems?
Yeah, I've come to the conclusion, Oliver, that there's no silver bullet, right? If there was, we would probably have discovered and implemented it already. But I think there's a couple really important policy steps that we could take to improve infrastructure delivery. A straightforward step that has been used around the world, where I think the United States is about 20 years behind the rest of the world, is innovating in infrastructure delivery. And whether you call it a public-private partnership or some other term, the idea is to allow more innovation into that process, more incentives to deliver infrastructure on time, on budget, more incentives to deliver, to innovate in the design. So that we call that alternative technical concepts, or ATCs, where the private sector can bring its comparative advantage to bear, and that is in raising risk capital, because a lot of these projects are risky, but also just thinking innovatively about whatever the public sector's goal is, its well-defined goal, how can they get that done more efficiently? Maybe at lower cost, maybe in a more attractive way in the design of the infrastructure facility. Bringing global expertise to bear. So I think one of these things, we call it a public-private partnership. There's also another tool, which I think is very, very much underappreciated in the United States, and that's called asset recycling. And this is a notion that was first introduced in Australia, and the Australians are the leaders, I think, globally in this asset recycling. I think it's almost a movement at this point, and that's the idea that we have these existing, and I think this could be very important for the United States. So we have all these infrastructure assets, many of which are quite old, particularly in the eastern part of the United States, where you have old water system, drinking water treatment, wastewater treatment systems, old electrical systems, old roads, bridges, tunnels, old airports, etc. And there's a lot of assets that are sitting under the control of state or local governments, sometimes counties as well. And there needs to be, I think, a change in mentality about optimizing the management of those assets. And by that, I mean, some cases, these governments own a lot of real estate. And that real estate has increased in value because maybe it's in or near a city, and it's kind of not being used in its most efficient way. They could either sell or lease that real estate. They could move some of their facilities that they need to another spot to free up that real estate. They could also lease out other assets under a concession lease for 10, 15, 20 years, whatever the amount of time is, and then get upfront payments. And the notion of asset recycling is you use those added payments, those added dollars, to recycle it back into your infrastructure. So to create a funding source, right? And the problem, again, is that those underlying dollars or funds can come out of squeezing the current infrastructure a little bit more efficiently through modern management techniques. So Australia did that, and they were very successful. They were surprised, I think, at how much Australia was able to realize from its existing infrastructure through better management. So those are two tools: asset recycling, public-private partnerships. But I think the third one is the one I'm going to talk about in your seminar today, which is really utilizing congestion pricing in a very comprehensive, efficient fashion. And congestion pricing, just to review, a lot of people are aware of it, is the notion that the use of the road is priced. And so it could be per kilometer, per mile, whatever the unit is, but it's priced per unit of use, just like we price per kilowatt hour of electricity, per therm of natural gas, per gallon of water, per minute of cell phone use, etc. But we allow that price to change with the current demand for the road. And so that's the congestion price. And we have a market in road use. So we create a large wholesale market, basically, for the use of road space. And we have typical markets in road use, and then we do this for wholesale electricity markets right now. We also do this for the use of the radio spectrum, which is now a commodity. And we have both a spot and a forward market in the use of roads. And we price the entire network the way we've priced the electricity network. And as I'll talk about more today, there's a lot of models we can use for how those markets could efficiently operate. But in theory, if applied properly, you could eliminate all traffic congestion that way. So and that's what I'm talking about would require a big change in mentality about the way people view transportation infrastructure. And I'm not going to minimize the political challenges to getting it implemented. However, I want to be clear that theoretically markets can address all traffic congestion. That's a very strong statement. I understand that, but the problem is not that cars are that manufacturers can't make more cars. They can. The problem is that the use of the road is mispriced.
Rick, I definitely agree with you. At least in the kind, even though not everyone is kind of advanced economist, but I think everyone will understand that if something is underpriced, and the people will tend to overconsume it.
Right.
Right. So
excess demand.
That's right. That's excess demand. I think that's great. 5 problems and 3 solutions. Seem like we're in a relatively good situation, right?
I hope so.
And the solutions, the dimension of the solutions is smaller than the dimension of the problem. So right. There is also kind of, quote unquote, silver bullet there, like just 3 silver bullets for 5 problems. But you mentioned, this exciting innovation, which is already happening in other countries. Like you took the example of Australia. You talk about their PPP practice as well as their asset recycling. So those sound very exciting. And you did mention that the U.S. we are actually somehow like 20 years behind, right? So what has been holding us up?
Right. So I think there's a couple of things. One, what we've been doing is what's called traditional delivery in the United States, and this particularly applies to transportation, but I think other types of infrastructure as well. And traditional delivery has a couple of elements. First of all, it's the way you bid out a project is design, bid, build. Okay, and what that means is you figure out what the public sector project sponsor, you might be a city or a state, county, and you say, we need this piece of infrastructure, right? We need a new school, we need a new water system, we need a new road, a bridge. And so we decide what capacity we want for that. And then we bid out the design, and we get various designers come in with their designs, and we pick the design we like, and then we bid out the construction of that design. And of course, it's bid out on the basis of least cost. So we get the least cost construction, right? Now that might be beneficial from the public fisc perspective, right? But there's a couple, several problems with it. One is that it doesn't consider, the long term, right? So what other countries have done, so that's traditional delivery. The other element of traditional delivery in the U.S. is we use tax-exempt municipal bonds. And as far as I know, the United States is the only country that has this type of financial instrument. And by tax-exempt municipal bonds, I mean that the holder of the bonds, right, the person who buys the bonds, pays no federal tax on the interest income that those bonds generate. So what that does is that because of the tax treatment alone, it lowers the interest costs that the public sector has to pay when they issue the bonds, right? So the idea is that you have this tax preference for debt bonds that is issued by a state or city to improve its infrastructure. Okay, so those two elements, design, bid, build, using tax-exempt municipal bonds as the financing tool, is what we call traditional delivery in the U.S.
I want to find out if my interpretation is correct. Can you mention especially the second point, this kind of tax-exempt municipal bond, which actually gives access to the general public, like the public government, to easier funding source, such that it makes the entry barrier for the private sector to come to this infrastructure market a little bit higher in comparison to other countries. So
Absolutely.
That in turn brews the momentum of this traditional delivery to just stay on and on.
Absolutely right. So I mean, the design, bid, build tradition in the U.S. Itself is a deterrent, because the state and local governments. So every other country in the world that I'm aware of, developed country and developing countries, combine design and construction. Design, bid, build is unusual, right? And we could go back into the historical reasons why the U.S. did this, but most countries, when they think about basic infrastructure delivery, think about a design build contract. And so I'm using taxable debt to finance it, right? So design, bid, build plus tax-exempt muni bonds, plus the third element, Oliver, that I've heard, is that the United States procurement system is very rigid, right? In other words, each state, the federal government, big cities have a very rigid set of rules about how you procure a new hospital or a school or a bridge or a tunnel, whatever it is. And I understand, why that may be, to prevent corruption, et cetera. And it was successful. The interstate highway system was delivered very efficiently, effectively. But that sort of mentality about delivery, being very formalized, doesn't allow for flexibility. It doesn't allow for innovation. So I would say it's those three things. It's design, bid, build, rigid procurement laws combined with tax-exempt municipal bonds, lower cost debt. So what we're trying to do, right, and this is kind of one of the additional missions of CIPA and our effort here, is to get conversations and education about alternative, innovative delivery techniques out to the state and local officials. And that would include use of PPPs, which, as I said, we're combining not just design and construction, but wrapping design and construction in with operation and maintenance. So what you do with that, Oliver, is you force under contractual penalties your private partner to make sure that the asset, again, whatever it is maintained in a state of good repair over that long time period. So if they don't, you can observe whether they're maintaining the road properly, are they maintaining the water system properly, and if not, you give them a contractual penalty, and perhaps you actually give them a contractual reward if they're doing it sooner or better than it was specified in the contract. So one of the nice things about public-private partnerships, it doesn't reduce or eliminate, but I think it doesn't eliminate, but I think it can reduce the problem of deferred maintenance. The other piece of this that needs to be used more is a financing tool called private activity bonds. And private activity bonds is this notion of, everybody kind of recognizes the distortion created by tax-exempt municipal bonds in the infrastructure financing markets And one way to address that is to give a privately issued bond that same tax treatment, so that the interest income on the bond is not taxable at the federal level, and that's what even though it's a privately issued bond. And so that's what you get with a private activity bond. And there's kind of a movement to expand the use. Those bonds have been used before, but only in a very restricted way, to expand the use of those bonds to other infrastructure assets, and there was a cap on the amount of those that could be issued to raise that cap. So there's some policy things that are in the works to try to get away from, or at least allow more innovation in, this traditional delivery model in the U.S.
This innovation is really reflecting this kind of systems approach. Mm-hmm. When you talk about this bundling from design to delivery to maintenance of infrastructure, I think you're basically talking really about a life cycle based approach,
right. Yep.
Instead of a piecemeal based approach. Right. Because I think an infrastructure, it's not that you just build it, it will operate forever. Actually, in construction of infrastructure is only probably less than 10% of its whole lifespan.
Right.
So, however, in a lot of traditional ways, probably this infrastructure was kind of contracted and built by this administration.
Right.
And then later on, of course, we always talk about the governor or administration, they cut the ribbon, right. Take all this credit. But if there is no very good life cycle based management and contracting enforcement, it could be 4 years later or 5 years later, it just collapses.
Right.
Right. So I think it's really a very good systems life cycle based approach. And I think one thing you mentioned earlier, this traditional approach of infrastructure procurement and delivery. Mm-hmm. Of course, whatever thing you call it traditional, which means that it already has a huge momentum.
Oh, sure.
In the society.
Sure.
And you mentioned this municipal bond, those three issues that are holding up, the adoption of innovation. Mm-hmm. But I can see that, those three factors are still in existence today.
Yeah.
So, but in the meantime, CIPA is really, I think, striding forward to look at all these exciting innovations that we would like the society to adopt. You can see the one thing, I feel like if I put myself in your shoes, I feel on one hand, you see all these exciting things that you would definitely would like the society to adopt.
Right.
But on the other hand, you see what is dragging us.
Yes.
So what keeps you hopeful and optimistic?
Mm-hmm. Well, so mainly, well, first of all, you're right about the traditional delivery. Almost by definition has momentum and it has staying power, right? It's the default way of delivering infrastructure, and it has been for decades, for 50, 60 years, so a long time. And state and local governments are used to this. They're scared, I think, about trying new types of delivery, because if something goes wrong, it's they'll be blamed for that. But I think there's also a general recognition, and again, this is happening, at least in the United States, mostly at the state and local level, that the old system performed its purpose. It was good during the time we used it, but that now it's time to change. And that system has given us a lot of deferred maintenance. It's given us poor project selection in a lot of cases. It's given us underfunding, and it's given us a slow environmental permitting process and other problems, right, that I articulated. And so there's a sense at the state and local level, there's a hunger to learn new approaches, that when you talk to the officials who are responsible for this infrastructure, that they really want to learn. Mm-hmm. And the second reason why I'm so optimistic is that there's a lot of other countries around the world, and I think the United States is very weak in this area, of just learning from what has been successful in other countries and trying to transplant that as best as we can to infrastructure delivery in the United States. So we don't have to, reinvent the wheel, as they say. We could innovate in something completely new, but it would be better to just look at what's been done in Australia, in the United Kingdom. France is a real innovator in this area. They've used public-private partnerships for hundreds of years. Spain, Chile. I mean, I could go around the world. Innovative PPPs are being used in Africa. And so we can look at global experience. And I think one of the roles of CPIP, and here at Cornell, because I believe Cornell is an ideal home for CPIP, is to go out and sort of observe what has been used around the world, what problems have come up, what successes have there been, and take those lessons and bring them back to the U.S. and convey them to the people who are actually responsible for this infrastructure. So it's it's exciting because we don't have to just do this in a vacuum. We can learn from a lot of experience, and there's a willingness and a recognition from the owners of this infrastructure that there's some serious problems that they have to address. So that is what keeps me excited about it.
So essentially, kind of, open the window, let the fresh air in.
Yeah.
So that open your mind.
Yes, exactly right.
Right.
Exactly right.
So then that's exact. I feel like the CPIP, it's really CPIP like is functioning. Of course, CPIP is is a research powerhouse. But in addition, in carrying out the mission that you just mentioned, I CPIP is really also actioning like a window, right? Mm-hmm. Bring all these things in. So one thing, I was thinking about. You say that the local government and the local and the state government, they're hunger, and they're longing for kind of new ideas.
Right.
And also earlier, of course, you said that these agencies mostly, to prevent, for example, corruption, they also operate in the very rigid, kind of conservative, atmosphere. So which in that case, I guess this perception of the new things, is very important. So what this problem lead us to another kind of topic that probably is dear to our heart. Mm-hmm. What do you see the role of CPIP in helping? I feel it's not these things. It's not really the technology problem. Mm-hmm. It's really kind of policy and a perception, and how we change the mindset. Not change. How can we help the decision makers from one mindset to another mindset? So speaking about all these things, so what do you see? What's your plan in terms of some major initiatives that you would like CPIP to help us and help the country to go where we should be?
Yeah. So great, obviously, an exciting question. I'm passionate about that, and I think it's useful, for everyone to think about, what does a university do, right? And because CPIP is a microcosm, right, of what the university itself does, and I think it's useful to put the university's mission into three buckets. One is research, right, and you and I have done a lot of that, and that's creating new knowledge, what we think of as new insights, and we do that through the double-blind, peer-reviewed academic journal process, right, that publishes our work if they think our findings are legitimate. And so one of the things that CPIP does is, it's a very expensive process, but is to support the research process to create new knowledge about infrastructure delivery and policy. The second is just teaching our students here, right? Students come to Cornell, they're of different levels, they're college students, graduate students, PhD students, and we need to have a solid curriculum in infrastructure policy to make sure those students are taught as best as we possibly can. And the third leg of the stool, so you need three legs to keep the stool up, and the third leg is public engagement and outreach. And I think Cornell is a very important part of Cornell's mission. It's a very important part of CPIP's mission, and that's going outside the university, outside our academic communities to convey our findings. And Cornell, that was the extension mission of Cornell in part, and CPIP I think has part of that as its mission, which is engaging journalists. So it could be print, radio, television, journalists who want to report on infrastructure issues, new technologies like the Hyperloop, or just problems with old infrastructure, bridges falling down, etc. So journalists is one big part of that. People in Congress, congressional committees. But to answer your question, Oliver, I think one thing that CPIP can do that is very well defined and important is to support, meaning pay for infrastructure delivery education for public sector people only. So this is not mixing public and private people together in a big conference. This is a rigorous classroom style, maybe 1 or 2 day seminar that we would help pay for, that would be open to state and local officials that actually own and deliver the infrastructure. And so that's, in my mind, part of the public engagement and outreach leg of the stool for CPIP. And I think CPIP is uniquely positioned, to really do a good job with that. So I think that's a clear way that CPIP can contribute to this overall infrastructure policy mission.
Rick, I totally agree with you. And it sounds like you laid out an approach, both kind of from bottom up, as well as from top down. It's kind of the reason I'm interpreting it this way, because as you pointed out, like we would like to work with the public sector to help them better know and appreciate different novel ideas or approaches. So kind of you talk about kind of 1 day or 2 day kind of workshop, bring a public sector, just public sector there, and kind of engage with them and share the new knowledge and new development. This because those people are they are at the forefront of infrastructure delivery. Like if they are equipped with all this new knowledge and new ideas, and definitely they can help put things on the ground. But in the meantime, I think you also mentioned, kind of at the Congress level, right, or state jurisdiction level, kind of also work with people from the top level. I think that's really a very, very nice approach, because I think infrastructure is really, it takes the whole chain.
Yeah.
Of all the stakeholders.
It does. Correct. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, to make it happen. So in one sense, in another sense, I think it's really a good like systems approach. I think both you and me, we're both the grad field member of systems engineering, and I think, for example, you are, even though you said you are economist, but I think based on all, if you appear on a TV program without saying that you are economist, and based on all the things you just talk about, and people can easily think, oh, this is a great civil engineer. Right? I think this is really beautiful. I think it's really
thanks, Oliver.
Yeah, I think this is really a good, I think, kind of reflection of this. I think kind of you are definitely going out of your traditional disciplinary area and reaching out and working in this. I think the nature of this work is really because our challenges, they are no longer just a disciplinary challenge. Yeah. It's really a cross-disciplinary challenge.
Right, I agree. Very much so.
Yeah. So this kind of problem leads us closer to the end of our conversation. And you may know, we talked about this system engineer. Of course, we have a very successful Master of Engineering degree program, which also include this learning degree program, which we have company employees that are taking this degree program. But also 3 years ago we started the PhD in systems. Oh, yeah. So we talk about this. So I probably told you that when we started this PhD program, we actually dropped the word engineering. So we call it PhD in systems. We don't call it PhD in systems engineering. So the reason, again, kind of, I think, echoed what you talked earlier. Our challenge and also our societal needs, it's really we need the collaboration between natural science, engineering, and social science. Right. That's why the PhD program is now definitely open to the social science. So from your own experience, what would you say to our system students including both master's and PhD students, what would you say to them so that they can now prepare themselves while attending the program here to face challenges and to provide solutions like what you are doing now? So what would you say to these future generations that we have a lot of hope for?
Right. So I would urge them to follow this general approach. So I think that you have to be a specialist in your chosen area. So you have to be if you're a civil engineer, you need to be well trained in civil engineering and take all the relevant classes and do well and get your certifications so that the industry, right, the broader world can define you as being an engineer. Or in my case, it was an economist. So I was able to get my doctorate in economics, and people can say, well, Rick he's an economist. He's an economist who does infrastructure policy, but we know his core competency is in the discipline of economics. So I would tell our students to never neglect that and be sure that they are expert and well-defined in that area, but subject to that constraint, Oliver, subject to the constraint that they're expert civil engineers, that they then, while at Cornell, take advantage of the breadth of knowledge and classes and experience that there is at Cornell and venture out so that they get some classes that are more social science. So classes in basic microeconomics, benefit cost analysis, project evaluation, right, and public sector management, which is taught through the CIPA program that you and I are both involved with, so that subject to becoming a skilled civil engineer and getting all the right qualifications for that profession, they become multidisciplinary, so that they can see. So I think you may have seen this in your career. Problem is that what the public sector people oftentimes are not civil engineers. They could be lawyers, they could be MBAs, they could come from public administration backgrounds, and then the civil engineers are talking to people with a very different perspective, and so they could be talking across each other when they're talking about delivering a big project, and the civil engineers are trained to think. So I think having that, if a student is here at Cornell, he or she has an amazing opportunity to get training in other perspectives. And I'm not only going to say economics, because I think there's a lot of other sociology would be very good, demography. There's a whole lot of things where Cornell is very strong, and those students should, subject to the constraint of becoming an expert in their own area, venture out of the engineering quad as much as they can, and talk to other faculty, talk to other students, take these courses, write papers, etc., in these other areas. So that would be because I think the successful researchers and professionals of the future are going to be these people that have these multidisciplinary perspectives, because the problems that we deal with in infrastructure require multidisciplinary solutions. So the people with that cross-disciplinary training are going to be the ones who I think are really successful.
Again, Rick, you are really a systems person. Because the reason, when I talk to system students, I say when you come to Cornell system program, we try to kind of train the student to have that what we call T-shaped knowledge structure. Kind of disciplinary kind of knowledge. You say subject to that constraint, which call this this vertical bar of the T. Right. And then you also mentioned this horizontal bar, which is kind of the broad, kind of broad knowledge structure and horizon.
Right.
For instance, so kind of you describe exactly, the T-shaped knowledge structure.
I like the T. I never thought of it as a T, but that the vertical is your core profession and your certifications and your degrees and skills, and then branch out from the top of the T, right?
That's true. So actually, for the systems program, we have a graduate level program, but we don't have undergraduate, because we feel you should come to the program with that vertical, established, and then help you, with that. And this also reminds me. I remember it was probably, I think, the former Lockheed Martin chairman, and he said, once, saying that kind of like an engineering, a very solid engineering education this is not his, exactly his words, but I'm
Right.
trying to kind of say what he means is that very good disciplinary engineering education can teach a person to do the thing right. However, like a system approach, especially with exposure to liberal arts and social science, can really teach a person to do the right thing. I think this is really kind of have a very good view and then do something right.
Right,
Again,
I like
kind of
that.
reflecting, I think what you said. I think we are running out of time. Of course, I refrain, even though I'm so interested about the thing you're going to talk about, but I refrained from asking questions.
Okay.
Because I think we have the seminar talk which you are going to deliver later. So I think
Right.
we're running out of time. I think I'm ready to go to the seminar
Okay.
room
Okay, good.
to
Thanks,
listen to
Oliver.
the other excited part.
Okay.
Thank you, Rick.
Good. Thanks,
Thank you.
Oliver.
Yeah.
Thanks for the interview.